Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede, and let me start by wishing all of you a happy new year. Now, 2026 is shaping up to be an interesting year politically in Florida, and a lot of it is going to come out of Tallahassee, where the legislature is expected to deal with a number of hot issues, including what to do about property taxes and Republican efforts to redraw congressional districts in the hopes of snuffing out as many Democratic seats as possible. Before the legislative session gets underway later this month, I spoke to Florida House Speaker Danny Perez, who is beginning his final year as Speaker. Will he continue to challenge Governor Ron DeSantis? And what exactly are his goals for this session?
I don't think the goals for this session changed much from last session. As a House, we said that for the first time, we wanted to actually walk the walk and be fiscal conservatives and look internally on wasteful spending. You know, we allow ourselves to preach the Doge message, which I agree on, but we have to do it internally as well. And last year was the first time since the recession that we voluntarily cut our budget. And we cut that by cutting fat while still having our essential services. But we cut wasteful spending, and we were able to not only bring a lower budget than the year before, but bring a lower budget than what the governor's proposal had, which also hadn't happened in several decades. So we're in a good place right now financially, but we're going to continue to chip away so we can limit government on wasteful spending. And then on the other side, Jim, something that I've always preached is that, look, I want the membership to be able to move their bills. Every district is different. We're 120 members in the Florida House from different parts of the state with different wants and different needs. And we're going to give every member the opportunity to move whatever policy is important to them over the next 60 days.
I think obviously one of the headlines that people are expecting in this session is the issue of property taxes. I know you had appointed a committee to look at property tax and whether or not there were areas to lower the property tax, particularly for homesteaded property owners. The governor has said he would like to eliminate all property taxes on homesteaded properties. Give me your idea of what you think is realistic heading into this session, knowing that it obviously has to be approved by voters in November.
Well, property taxes are going to get done in the House. I can guarantee you that. There will be something on the ballot that comes out of the House at a bare minimum for the voters to vote on. The governor deserves a lot of credit, Jim. You know, I'd say almost a year ago to the date, he said he wanted to eliminate property taxes. And I commend him for that bold move, for that bold opinion. We still don't have a proposal on how the governor plans to abolish property taxes, but we're patient. We'll keep waiting. We've been waiting for a year. We can wait longer than a year if that's what it takes to get the proposal from the governor. A complete abolishment would be about a $20 to $25 billion shortfall, especially in education. I'd say over 20 counties would probably go upside down. But the governor says he has a plan. We're waiting to see that plan. We don't have one. But in the meantime, Jim, we've listened to our voters. Our voters want something done on property taxes. So we have come up with 7 different proposals in the Florida House, all of which have moved through the committee process. We've had these debates. We've had these conversations. And eventually we will pass one of those proposals to eventually get on the ballot so that the people can vote on what they want. In our proposals, we've made sure that we take care of our first responders, but we've also made sure that we take care of education. One of our proposals, just to give you an example, is the elimination of property taxes for homestead properties, but not for school property taxes, because that's what funds our education. But we've been very well thought out in our proposals, Jim, and this has been a discussion internally amongst all members from both parties, from all across the state, to try and see how we can best solve for this problem of having property taxes. I don't want property taxes. I don't think anyone wants any tax, if we're going to be honest, Jim. But at this point, the only body that has even had a conversation, let alone multiple HJRs or proposals, is the House. The Senate says they're going to wait for the governor to tell them what to do, essentially. And the governor's, I guess, still waiting to come up with his own proposals. But we're moving, and I give the governor credit for that. But we're still waiting for a proposal. It's very easy for the headline to say you want to abolish property taxes, but how you go about it is a different ball of wax.
On the issue of what may appear on the ballot, do you envision multiple ballot issues? In other words, for instance, a ballot question about first responders, a ballot question related to seniors, a ballot question related to maybe first-time home buyers? Or do you see whatever comes out next November as being one ballot measure that may have several parts to it, all related to property taxes?
I see it as one ballot measure. Look, I think the senior proposal is a great example. And for your viewers that haven't seen it, the House came up with a proposal to eliminate homestead property tax for those that are 65 and older. Representative Porras is the one that's carrying that bill, one of our own here from Miami. And it's actually caught great traction. The governor has come out and said he would not approve of that bill. And so, look, he has the opportunity to do that, and that's his job as the executive branch, to veto whatever he thinks is wrong. And so we're trying to find that balance on something that eliminates as much or abolishes as much of property taxes as we can, while getting the approval of the governor and the Senate. The Senate hasn't opined on what they agree or disagree with. I think at this point they're just going to wait for the governor to give them direction, which is fine. If that's what they choose to do, that's what the Senate president has that ability to do so, and he's a good person that I'm sure has the best interest of Florida in his mind when he decides to give an opinion like that. But what I expect, Jim, and we said this in a memo that was public. We came up with multiple proposals to maybe pass one, maybe pass multiple, maybe pass none. And the reason that I worded it that way, Jim, is because I'm not the only hoarder of good ideas. Quite frankly, usually I'm not the hoarder of good ideas, and other people have better ideas than I do. And I've told the governor, if you have a better idea than what we proposed, please, by all means, send me that. I'd love to put that through the committee process and eventually pass it off the House floor so that the voters can finally vote on abolishing or eliminating property taxes. So we'll see what those ideas end up being. For now, we just have what the House has proposed, which have a group of great ideas that are still going through the legislative process.
How concerned are you that whatever is done on property taxes could have a serious impact on local communities, for instance, local counties that rely on those property taxes? How do you balance that?
Jim, that all depends on what the proposal ends up being. A full abolishment is different than an abolishment with the exception of school property taxes, which is different from an abolishment for those that are 65 and older, which is significantly different from an increase in a homestead exemption. So I think it all depends on what that final proposal is. But it is important for your viewers to know that we are taking that into consideration. We do know that this could significantly damper local governments. Now, that being said, Jim, local governments do also need to take an internal look at some of their spending. We are seeing that local government, like any government, Jim, I don't think any government is free of this. Local governments have to look internally and see where some of this waste is and start to cut, because the cuts are coming. And if they're not coming from the state because of property taxes, they're going to come because of the economy.
You made mention a couple of times of the Senate President, Ben Albritton, because obviously it's a dance between both chambers of the legislature. It seemed as if, and this is my observation, and I want to get your reaction, it seemed that in the beginning of the session, you and the Senate President were much more in tune and aligned, and it seemed that as the session went on, the tension sort of grew between the two of you. How do you view your working relationship with Ben Albritton as you head into this new session?
Well, first, I think Ben Albritton, Senate President, is a good man. He's a good husband. He's a good father. That being said, I do disagree with, respectfully, I do disagree with how he's led the Senate. And the difference wasn't in the relationship, Jim, between him and I. The difference was in his independence from the executive branch. I think early on in the legislative session last year, you saw that the Senate kind of stood up independent of the authoritarian figure of the governor at the time. And now we're seeing that they've kind of gone back in their ways, in my opinion, by the way, which I'm sure the president would disagree with me on playing more of a follower figure. And I just think that's not the way to lead. And obviously we disagree with that in the House. Do we work together? Of course we work together. And I'm sure we will continue to work together and come up with a product that's in the best interest of all Floridians over the next 60 days. We are able to compartmentalize our disagreements with our job. Our job is to lead our chamber, and I will lead the House the way that I believe is best suited for the House, and he will lead the Senate the way that he believes is best suited for the Senate. The one thing that we're not going to do is, we are not an employee of the governor's office. We are not an employee of the executive branch. We are an independent, co-equal branch of government. We represent the people. We're the closest to the people. And so, that is what governs us. I always tell people our only boss are our constituents. Those are the people that we work for, and those are the people that we listen to. And that's how we're going to govern over the next 60 days. But I have no doubt that the Senate and the House will be able to eventually come together to come forward with a product, not just on policy, but on the budget that everyone will be proud of. And the same goes for the governor, Jim. Obviously, I've had my disagreements with the governor, but he's been a good governor. He's done a good job in the state of Florida. I respect the governor, and him and I will work together as well as we move forward over the next 60 days and eventually land this plane and ride off into the sunset. This is my last year as Speaker of the House, so I definitely want to do it right.
I have another question about the Senate president, but I can't help but note that you use the word authoritarian figure when it comes to the governor. Do you view the governor and his approach to how he governs as authoritarian?
Look, in this body of work that we are in the state legislature, you have to be able to compromise, and no one is ever able to leave with everything they wish and want for. Sometimes you have to make a deal, and a part of that deal means giving another party something that maybe you didn't care as much about, but to them may have been very important for their community, their district, their part of the state. I have found it very difficult to be able to have a working relationship with the governor on compromise. I think up until now, the governor has had the benefit of getting everything and anything he's ever wanted with having to give up very little to the opposing party. I don't see myself as an opposing party. I see myself as a partner, and I was hoping that he would see us as the same. But it's still a working relationship. It's a work in progress for us to be seen as an equal partner. The moment that he's able to do that, I think we'd be able to get along very well. But until he sees us as a working partner and not an employee, I think it's going to be tough for the House to work with him.
Along that line of recognizing that there are things that are important for others' constituencies, going back to the Senate president, rural renaissance was his priority last year. It passed the Senate unanimously. It did not pass the House. It got broken into a series of bills, I don't think any of which really passed. I know that the Senate is planning on taking up rural renaissance again early in the session. Do you envision that rural renaissance in its totality will pass? In other words, will you take that bill up early in the session, or will you hold it, to use a political term, will you hold it hostage throughout the course of the session as a leveraging chip against the Senate president?
We'll see. We'll see, Jim. You got to let the process play out. We don't know. We don't know what's in this year's version. I think it's different than last year's version. Our membership will have an opportunity to make that decision on whether or not they want to vote it out of committee or vote it onto the floor eventually. And I'll obviously be a part of that process as well. But I think it's a little early to tell where specific bills are going to be. As you know, Jim, each member of the House has 7 bills to file. There's 120 members in the House. That's a lot of bills. And the committee process has already started. We went through 6 committee weeks, and they were very fruitful. But where some of these bills are going to end up, I think, is a little too early to tell.
When we come back, we talk about congressional redistricting. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue now with my conversation with Florida House Speaker Danny Perez. Republicans have made it clear they will push forward with a redistricting plan in the hopes of eliminating Democratic seats to try and block Democrats from taking control of the House in November.
Yeah, look, the governor has opined that he believes redistricting is a conversation that has to be had. I have said the same. I believe the Senate president had said that he is going to follow the governor's lead, and he agrees with what the governor was saying. So that means all of us agree that redistricting is a conversation that has to be had. What I don't agree with, Jim, is ending session in early March and then coming back in May and dragging everyone back to Tallahassee on taxpayer dollar to have a discussion that we can have right now. If he disagrees with the content of whatever that final product may be, which, by the way, we don't have a final product, that we don't even have a map in the House yet. This is a conversation that's ongoing. Our committee process on redistricting just started. Then he can disagree with us now on that issue. But I think the conversation has to be had. I think it's irresponsible to have many of our members come back to Tallahassee away from their families, away from their businesses, away from their communities on an issue that we can have right now. So yes, Jim, you are right. The House is going to have that conversation during session, and is going to have a product at some point during session for the membership to vote on. And if the Senate doesn't want to take that up, well, that's their choice to make. And if that's the case, we'll move from there. Remember, this is not something that the governor, is involved with on the front end, but I'm sure he's going to opine on it throughout the process as well.
You said that you and the governor agree and the Senate president agree that redistricting is an issue that needs to be dealt with. Why? Normally, redistricting occurs after the 10-year census, after the census is done and you know where populations have shifted, and then you move forward from there. Explain to me why the state of Florida needs to redraw its congressional districts.
Well, we believe, I'll speak on behalf of the House. I don't want to speak on behalf of the Senate President or the governor, but we believe that a recent court decision in Black Voters Matters has given us the ability to have that conversation and potentially redistrict the congressional maps. And that's also an important part, Jim. We're only talking about the congressional maps at this point. There is a pending case out there, the Louisiana versus Calais, which we don't know exactly where that's going to end up. That there hasn't been a Supreme Court decision on the Louisiana case yet. That also may determine the outcome of redistricting over the next several months. We don't want to wait for that court decision, even though that court decision may potentially move the needle in a certain direction. I don't know what direction it would move in, but of course, as a court decision coming from the Supreme Court, you would see some sort of move. But what we wanted to do is we believe that the ability to have that conversation is there, it's ripe, and that's what we're doing. Where this ends up, we'll see, Jim. I don't think, and I don't know this. You're a little older than me, Jim, so maybe you do know, but I don't think there's ever been a redistricting map that hasn't been contested in the court system. I'm sure this would be no different, but just because there's a potential adversary in the court system doesn't mean that we should shy away from having the conversation. So, look, we don't have any maps right now, Jim. We'll see what it looks like. But to answer your question, we will have something for the members to vote on this session.
But again, I'm trying to understand, what is the imperative? Why do we need to do a redistricting for 2026 when you're going to do one 3 or 4 years from now anyway after the census? I guess I still don't understand what the reason or the rationale is for redistricting congressional districts if it's other than that it's just politics, that it's an attempt to draw districts in a way that favor Republicans and disfavor Democrats, because we've seen that's what Texas did. We've seen California is planning on doing it in the other direction. And Florida just seems to be in this tit for tat moment here. And is that reason enough to want to redraw congressional districts?
I don't think it's tit for tat, Jim. And just so we're clear, the state of Florida has significantly different laws than Texas or Indiana or California. We're all governed by different state laws. Of course, there's a federal component to all of this, but we're a different state, and we believe that we have the chance to have that conversation, and we're gonna do that over the next couple of months.
But this is political. This is the notion of redrawing congressional maps is a political one. And as you said, we're a state bound by laws, and the voters in Florida overwhelmingly passed something known as fair districts, which prohibits redrawing congressional maps or any maps, state maps, for political gerrymandering purposes. So how do you get around that?
We believe that the Black Voters Matters case gives us the ability to go around that and have the conversation, Jim. Obviously, people are going to disagree with that. It's expected, and we'll disagree with them at the right time. But for now, we're going to have the conversation in the House and see what ends up happening.
Okay. I wanted to ask a couple of things. The governor has been talking a lot lately about data centers and the scourge of data centers and not wanting to see massive data centers in Florida. Do you share that view? I'm just sort of curious. I don't know that I've ever asked you about data centers before. Where do you come from that discussion?
I think the governor brings up a good point in that there is a high cost to data centers. I don't think he's wrong at all. A little bit hypocritical coming from him because he just signed a tax package a year ago that gave a tax breaks to data centers. So I'm a little confused on his direction of what he intends to where he intends to end on data centers. But look, data centers are kind of there's a benefit to them, and they're somewhat of the future. Yes, he's right in saying, energy is an important part of the state, important part of the country. We may be deficient in energy, and data centers are a part of that conversation. But to say that data centers are evil and a conversation not worth having is something that I disagree with, and that's recently what he's been saying. And he kind of he couples it with AI, and he has proposed that he wants to come up with a Bill of Rights against AI to limit artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. And look, I'm 38, but I'm an old soul. I'm scared as hell of artificial intelligence, but it's a reality of the world that we live in today. To say that we want to not deal with AI, I think is negligent. I think, we have to put some guardrails on it, of course. He makes great points on that, but to not want to deal with it and try to make it vanish, one, I just don't think it's realistic. And also, Jim, we're in this place now where, back in the Cold War, we were in a race for nuclear arms. Today's race is artificial intelligence. That is the world that we're living in today. And if we fall behind China, Russia, and India on some of these AI races, on some of these nuclear arms races, which I would say today is probably closer to AI than nuclear arms themselves, we're going to fall behind. And it becomes to me, it becomes an issue of national security. And I've been saying that for a couple months now, but I don't know what the world's going to look like in 10 years. But one thing I don't want is to give an upper hand to the Chinas of the world on something that is the future of the world that we live in, whether we like it or not. So as much as I'm concerned with it, and the governor brings up valid reasons, I think, trying to attempt to make it vanish just isn't a reality.
I have just a couple more questions and I'll let you go, but I did want to ask about Schools of Hope. The legislation that passed last year, there seems to be some concerns, and understandable concerns, because there's almost been like a gold rush to sort of have charter schools, lay claim to classroom spaces in public schools. Do you see that the Schools of Hope measure that was passed previously will probably be revisited in this coming session? Because it seems like you've set up a situation where, maybe perhaps unintended, where you're going to end up having these for-profit schools like Academica, suddenly demanding classroom space in public schools where they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay for the electricity, they don't have to pay for security, they get to share with libraries and cafeterias and all that sort of stuff without any cost to them. I don't know that that was the intention, but that's certainly now the concern. Do you see Schools of Hope being revisited?
K through 12 education is something we revisit every year. There's two certainties in K through 12. One, we increase the budget every single year to make sure that the next generation of Floridians have enough resources to be taught and to learn. So I'm sure we will do the same this year. And number two is Schools of Hope. To answer your question more directly, yeah, of course we're gonna look at it again. It doesn't mean that the changes that you mentioned or you're potentially proposing are the ones that we're going to discuss. But Schools of Hope is something that we're going to look at. And when you bring up the issue of schools that are vacant, that are being filled by charter schools, which are still non-traditional public schools, those vacancies are something that aren't being filled by the traditional public schools. And so what we're trying to do is increase the population in that school, even if it's through a third party, through a charter school, because those classrooms just aren't being used. And of course, we want them to be used. But that's a conversation, Jim, to kind of bring this in for a landing here, that we will have over the next 60 days.
But on a fundamental level, do you believe that for-profit charter schools should have to pay something to the school district for use of those facilities?
Look, that's a valid point. It's been brought up to me, by the way, by our own school board members here in Miami, which I value their opinion tremendously. But that's something that we're going to look at this session.
We'll be right back. Well, that's all the time we have. If you have any thoughts or comments about today's show, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.